Hey everybody, how are you? Midnight, good to see you again. I'm glad to see you. We have Dark Fu here, we have Janlin. Dark Fu I think has been here for a while though. Let's see. Currently working on a map. Oh, are you? Nice. Alright, turn things down slightly. Is it this one? No. Is it this one? No, it's not that one. Is it this one? There we go. Oh, dang it. Welcome and sit around the fire for another reading stories. Today's episode we continue our reading of the story from Fazbear Frights, The Breaking Wheel. When we last left off, our protagonist, the main character in the story, Reed, had shackled Julius's form into the exosuit of the boy's science project. As they went home and enjoy contemplating the existence of life itself. No, he went home, gonna eat snacks, and he thought about releasing Julius from his contraption, but he's gonna do it later. And back to the story. Sorry. Snacks? I do have popcorn. Bring your own snacks. Do I hear snacks? No, you don't hear snacks. Let me turn up the fireplace a little bit. There we go. Let us continue. I do have a bottle of water here with me as well. Wet my whistle. Alright, where are we? Reed loved his dad, and he knew his dad did everything he could to give Reed and Alexa a good home. But his dad was, well, his dad. He knew nothing about what a good home was. He couldn't cook, he couldn't clean. He thought decoration was a calendar with fish photos on it and a few sports teams' calendars. I'm sorry, schedules, not calendars. A few sports team schedules. When Reed was home, he never really felt at home, not like he did here at the Gerard house. Reed sprawled on a thick, soft gray rug in front of a stone hearth. A low-burning fire sputtered on the grate. Thales, exhausted from a rousing game of chase the tennis ball, was now stretched out on the cool tiles of the nearby entryway, adding his satisfying snores to the flames' staccato popping. The sounds were both rhythmic and soothing. Reed's belly was full of spicy chicken wings, jalapeno poppers, potato skins, homemade pot pie, and chocolate cookies. He was so relaxed he wished he could take a nap. "You kids have everything you need before I head to my class?" Mrs. Garrard asked. She stood in the archway between the family room and the entryway, tugging on a floppy yellow raincoat. A rain hat. Reed turned and looked over his shoulder, out through the French door to the Garrard's heavily treed backyard. Yep, it was raining. A steady but light spring rain. The drops looked shiny and pink in the twilight. Reed craned his neck to the western horizon. He looked at the sun, which was getting ready to slide into nighttime. Tonight, the sun was a fuzzy, bright orange tinge with purple. He looked back at Miss Garrard. Thanks for the snacks and for dinner, too. Mrs. Garrard smiled and tucked her shoulder-length dark hair under the rain hat. She shrugged her short, plump body into her slicker and said, You're welcome. As always, Reed. We love having you here. She snapped her slicker closed and looked at her own kids, who were all oblivious of her impending departure. Shelley reclined on an overstuffed navy blue sofa, had her nose buried in the same thick history book she'd been reading on the bus. Pickle sat cross-legged in his dad's blue-tweeted recliner, bending so low over his own book it looked like he was trying to dive into it. Reed couldn't see what Pickle was reading. The third Garrard kid, 6-year-old Ori, had been playing a video game, but now he was picking up the remote for Pickle's robot skeleton. Kids! Miss Garrard yelled. All three of her children looked up. Mrs. Garrard shook her head and smiled. I'm leaving. You kids behave. And Pickle, ice that nose again in an hour or so. I tried to explain the situation, Janlin. What did you not understand? Give me an example of what you didn't understand, and I'll try to explain it. Yeah, I wasn't paying attention. Bipolar people when you harass them with a magnet, because I am making a map. Oh, well, whatever. Anyway. I'm leaving. You kids behave. And Pickle, ice that nose again in an hour or so. Huh? Pickle said. Miss Garrard shook her head. I'll remind him, Reed said. Pickle's nose was looking much better. Predictably, Mrs. Garrard had matter-of-factly treated Pickle's nose the second they got home. Examining it, she declared it bruised, not broken, and she cleaned it up, applied some kind of herbal cream, and then given Pickle an ice pack to balance on his face. Pickle resisted that because he couldn't read with a pack on his nose, but he didn't have to leave it on for long. Soon, he was eating snacks along with everyone else, and he declared the double chocolate cookies Mrs. Garrard brought out for dinner healing cookies because his nose stopped hurting after he ate them. Now, after studying her beaky son for a second, Mrs. Garrard looked at Reed. What will we do without you, Reed? Mrs. Garrard smiled at him and then turned her back to her kids. Bye, kids. Love you, Mom, Shelley said. Bye, Pickle and Ori said in unison. Thanks again, Mrs. Garrard. Bye, Reed said. Bye, all, Mrs. Garrard said. Come on, Thales. Thales was already on his feet, standing next to Mr. Garrard's legs. His tail whipped so fast it was slapping her on the thigh. Mrs. Garrard's class was his class, too. He was learning to be a therapy dog. Mrs. Garrard thought not the source of her children, though not the source of her children's brilliance, was no brain slouch. She went to all sorts of classes. She seemed to have a lot of interests, and she always joined in the conversations when her kids were babbling on about their homework or projects. But the Garrard brains came mostly from Mr. Garrard. He was a retired electrical engineer who now did consulting for big companies. He traveled a lot and he was gone now, but when he was here, he was a hands-on dad. He was cool. Shelley and Pickle had returned to their books before the front door shut behind Mrs. Garrard. Ori pressed a button on the remote control, and Pickle's robot skeleton stood up and slid forward a few inches. Ori's eyes lit up. Ori was a conglomeration of his siblings, which made him not as cute as Shelley, but much cuter than Pickle. His face was still round and a little pudgy. Ori had Shelley's large eyes and long lashes and full mouth, and he had his brother's nose. On Ori, the big nose was more amusing than ugly. He looked a little like a baby bird. 60-year-olds could rock a look like that. Ori wouldn't have to worry about looks for a while. Ori bent over the remote, so intent on it he nearly touched it with his long nose. The little robot skeleton scooted forward some more. Ori laughed. Reed glanced at Pickle. Pickle either didn't know his brother was playing with his project or he didn't care. Probably, if Ori damaged the thing in any way, Pickle could easily fix it. Reed looked at his own pathetic project. He was supposed to be working on it. And he had been, sort of. Off and on all afternoon. He hadn't made much progress, though. Reed had chosen an electric motor as his actuator because his dad knew how to build a motor and was excited to help him. That part of the project, along with connecting the battery-powered motor to the exoskeleton's circuitry, had gone okay. The problem Reed had now was with the skeleton's structure. As always, he couldn't visualize how to construct the form. Every time he attached a new metal component to the skeleton, he ended up with something that stuck out at an unnatural angle. And when he turned it to make it fit, the joint didn't work properly. Right now, his exoskeleton looked mangled and backwards. This wasn't good. Thank you for the hydrate. Yes, I will need multiple hours. Maybe days to stop talking about this. You're fine. Talk about it all you want. But thank you for the hydrate, Midnight. Let's see. Reed sighed and gazed around the cozy room. Even though the Garrard family room was big and had high ceilings, it was warm and inviting. Thank you for the hydrate, Janlin. Jeez. Where was it? Even though the Garrard family room was big and had high ceilings, it was warm and inviting, kind of like a cocoon. Filled with comfortable, soft furniture, a couple tables, multiple shelves stuffed with books and games, colorful art, a tidy play area for Ori, a big microfiber-covered bed for Thales, the fireplace, and a huge TV for movie night and video games. The room was perfect for hanging out. It wasn't so bad for doing homework, either. You might as well be comfortable while you were doing something you didn't want to do. The week before, the family room got an addition that intrigued Reed. It was a miniature house, a replica of the Garrard house. Garrard home. Standing about 3 feet tall and stretching 4 feet wide, the house required the removal of one ottoman from the room. But otherwise, it fit in just fine. Mr. Garrard built the house for Shelley, and she was decorating it to look exactly like the family's real house. Do you want me to help you with that? Do you want me to help you with that? Pickle asked. Huh? Reed looked over at his friend. Pickle marked his book, which Reed could now see was an advanced engineering mathematic. You sighed, Pickle said, and your exoskeleton looks like it's being built by a blind man without opposable thumbs. I wondered if you wanted some help. Reed threw a gear at Pickle. Pickle didn't mean to be mean. He was just brilliant in his own matter-of-fact kind of way. That was why he was okay to hang out with, even though he was super smart. Pickle never made Reed feel dumb, even when he made a comment like that one. Reed knew Pickle wasn't making fun of him. Pickle was just making an observation. I'll muddle through it. Thank you. You might try angling the joints so the left and right limbs move in the same, or at least similar ways. Unless you're building an alien exoskeleton. Thank you, Mr. Obvious, Reed said. He made a face. Maybe I am building an alien exoskeleton. Cool. Pickle shrugged and returned to his book. Shirley looked up from hers. What? Reed laughed. My exoskeleton is an alien. Shirley rolled her eyes and returned to reading. Ori laughed. Reed turned to see if the kid was laughing at Reed. He wasn't. He was fully focused on the robot's remote. Pickle's robotic skeleton plowed into the earth with a loud crunch. Pickle didn't look up from his book. Ori backed up the 7-inch skeleton and started spinning it in a circle. Reed began to reconsider Pickle's offer. He was pretty sure Pickle had built this little robotic skeleton in a day. Maybe he could help Reed salvage this project. Seriously, look at the thing move, Reed thought. He shook his head at the little robotic skeleton as it whipped in tight circles. He sucked in his breath and sat up. How could he have forgotten what happened in class today? Well, to be fair, a lot had happened since class. The confrontation with Julius, along with Reed's resulting uncharacteristic burst of nerve, had pretty much acted like a brain wipe of the rest of the day. All Reed could think about was Julius locked in his exoskeleton. But now he remembered. Julius had been complaining that Pickle's remote was affecting Julius's exoskeleton. And Julius was now locked into that metal frame. His body intricately linked in its structure and therefore intricately linked with its movements. Inextricably. Yeah. What it... Thank you for the nut. What if it had crashed into something the way Pickle's robot had just crashed into the hearse? What if it was spinning in circles right now? Hey, Pickle! Reed kept his gaze on the gyrating mini metal skeleton. Huh? Pickle looked up at Reed. That thing, Reed pointed at the remote in Ori's small hands. Doesn't have much of a range, right? Pickle sniffed. It's a pretty great range, actually. I designed the remote to function through walls. That's why I combined IR and RF. So if it was controlling something outside the house, how far would its range be? Reed asked. Pickle frowned. Whoops. Ah, shit, I lost my place. Oh, here it is. Pickle frowned. You mean if the skeleton was outside and Ori was inside? Reed nodded. Yeah. Sure, that's what he meant. Thank you for the quack. He didn't mean if the robot was controlling Julius' skeleton? No, he didn't mean that at all. Pickle tilted his head and thought about it. It might reach to a few feet outside the house, maybe. Honestly, I've never checked. It probably doesn't reach beyond the house. The outer walls be thicker than the inside walls, more interference. You shan't ever escape my sound effects. Thank you, Janland. Oh, Reed said, attempting to sound uninterested even though he had asked the question. Okay. Reed tugged at his t-shirt, which was sticking to his suddenly sweaty skin. He suppressed a sigh of relief. Pickle leaned forward. Why'd you ask? Ori now had the robotic skeleton racing through the room in dizzying serpentine routes around furniture. Reed tried not to imagine Julius zipping around a robotic classroom in a similar fashion. If he was doing in his suit what Pickle's robot was doing here, Julius would be bashing the walls and furniture. He'd be at least badly bruised. More likely, he'd have broken bones. Oh man, Reed thought. I might be truly torturing Julius. Reed? Reed looked at Pickle. He was suddenly elated that his friend's genius didn't extend to reading minds. And he was also glad that Pickle also sucked at deciphering facial expressions, body language, and other social cues. Reed was sure his deliberately blank face wasn't as effective as he wanted it to be. He was trying for innocent, but he had a feeling it looked like Thales did when the dog stole a cookie and was trying to pretend he didn't. Oh, I was just curious, Reed said. It's impressive, that's all. Pickle raised a thick black eyebrow. Okay. Pickle might not have been able to read interpersonal visual cues, but his brain was like an audio recorder. He remembered everything he'd ever read or heard. He was now going through the database and contrasting everything Reed had ever said to him before today with what Reed had just said. Reed had never told Pickle that something he'd done was impressive. He was so used to Pickle outperforming everyone around him that praising Pickle for doing something well was sort of like praising him for breathing. Pickle definitely found Reed's last comment strange. Pickle opened his mouth as he was going to ask a question, but Ori saved Reed. He plowed Pickle's skeleton into the side of Shelley's miniature house. The metal hit the wood siding with a thud, and Shelley sat up on the sofa. She stuck a bookmark in her book, clearly ready to confront her little brother. Before she could do or say anything, though, Ori backed out the robotic skeleton and ran it forward again. He giggled and repeated the action, bumping the little robot into the miniature house over and over. Shelley jumped up. Hey, Ori, stop it! He's not going to hurt it, Pickle said. Let him play with it. I'm not worried about your robot, Shelley said. He's going to hurt my house. He's going to mess up my project. Shelley started toward Ori, who giggled and darted away from her. Shelley chased Ori, but he easily stayed ahead of her. He continued to play with the remote at the same time, so the little robot kept butting at the house. Ori, you little twerp, Shelley said. I'm going to break our sibling vernaculum if you don't cut that out. Vernaculum was one of the daily words from the previous week. It meant bond. That one stuck in Reed's head because he thought when Shelley defined the word that he'd like a deeper vernaculum with her. Adjust. Ori, if you ruin my project... What project? Reed asked. He didn't care. He was just trying to distract himself from the thoughts about Julius, who, if he was being controlled by Pickle's remote, was probably being slammed into a wall in the classroom right now. Or what if he was being slammed into something sharp, like one of Mrs. Billings' robotic arms? Could Julius get impaled? It's a project for psychology class about family dynamics, Shelley said, panting and lunging for her little brother. Seriously, Shell, it's okay, Pickle said. The robot isn't going to hurt the house. It doesn't have any sharp edges. Pickle set aside his book and scrambled out of his dad's chair. He went over to where the robot was attacking the house over and over, leaning forward and pointing at the tiny rough pieces of overlapping wood. That looked like the gray shingles siding on the real house, he said. See? Not a scratch. Shelley stopped pursuing Ori. She came back to the miniature house, knelt down, and examined it. Oh, she shrugged and returned to her sofa. Okay. She picked up her book and presumably returned to medieval torture. Torture. What if Julius is being tortured right now? He had to be battered pretty badly if he'd been forced to do everything Pickle's robot was doing. Pickle sat down on the floor in front of Shelley's house. He reached out and snatched up his robot. Oh, thank you for hosting, Janlin. Pickle sat down on the floor in front of Shelley's house. He reached out and snatched up his robot. Ori, desist for a second. Ori shoved out his lower lip. But I wanna... He began to whine. I'm not going to take it away from you, Pickle assured his brother. I'm going to make it more fun. Pickle held up his metal skeleton, which was still whirring in an effort to respond to the remote's commands. Ori's lower lip returned to its normal position. He stopped playing with the remote, and his face brightened. Yeah? What are you going to do? He came over and sat down next to Pickle. I've got something cool to show you, Pickle said. And something else you could do with this. Pickle put down the robot. He nudged Ori. So, watch this, Pickle whispered. Pickle flipped the switch on the little robot. Now, try it, Pickle said to Ori. Ori grinned and pushed a button on the remote. The robot stood on its blockish head. What did you do? What did you do? Reed asked Pickle. Oh, I just turned off the joint constraints. So now my robot can go against logical joint directions too. Like yours, only on purpose. Hey, lady. How are you? Where was I? Ori gleefully pushed the buttons and toggled the joystick on the remote, and the little robot flipped off its head and turned into a metal contortionist. It started crawling across the floor like an octopus, its joints warping into impossible pretzel-like shapes, looking at once like it was turning itself inside and out, like it was expanding and contracting the way a beating heart did. The robot became so fluid it resembled a snake. Ori directed the robot into the entryway area, and it clicked and clacked over the slate and as it undulated across the floor. Reed stared at it, his throat constricting. In his head, instead of the sound of the robot's middle limbs contracting the hard floor, Reed could hear the snaps and pops of breaking bones. Julius's breaking bones. The sounds were in his head, weren't they? He was imagining it and not hearing it, right? No, of course he wasn't hearing it. Thank you for the quack. No, of course he wasn't hearing it. How could he hear it? Pickle said the remote's range couldn't reach much beyond the Gerard's house. And even if it was happening, Reed wouldn't be able to hear it. His ears weren't superhuman. They were miles from the school. If his mind was telling him he could hear Julius's bones break, his mind was lying. Reed's fears were so stupid. He couldn't believe his mind was coming up with this stuff. It was asinine. There was no way Pickle's remote could have any impact on Julius's framework. Therefore, it was having no impact on Julius. So why did Reed feel so rotten? Thank you for the hydrate and the posture check. Oh. And the stretch. Oh, jeez. Spams. Thank you for the hydrate. I gotta wet my whistle. My throat's getting dry. Thank you for the water. Anyway, where was I? So why did Reed feel so rotten? Why was his stomach in his throat? Where did he feel like he might throw up all the great food he's eaten? Did he intuitively know something? Was his intuition right and his logic wrong? Reed took a deep breath and looked at his exoskeleton. Focus, he told himself. Stop imagining all that stupid stuff. I'm going to refund that because I'm not switching. Boop. Boop. I hope you guys enjoy the fireplace. Merry Christmas. It's not even Christmas yet. Managing requests. Sorry. There we go. That has been refunded back to you, 0. Anyway, where were we? Hey, Lumbax, Christmas one shot when? Probably after Christmas. That would be an interesting one, though. So I'll think about that. Alright. Reed leaned over his project. He tried to concentrate on his exoskeleton's joints. But he couldn't. Or he was having just too much fun with Pickle's robot. Now that the boy could make the thing writhe all over the place, he was practically dancing with glee. Pickle returned to his dad's easy chair and picked up his book. Shelley was still lost in her own reading. Ori started making the robot assault Shelley's house again. Shelley glanced up, but apparently comforted by Pickle's assurances, she placidly returned to her book. Reed scrambled off the floor. He'd had enough. I'll be back, he said. I have to do something. Ori ignored him, continuing to aim the flopping robot at the side of Shelley's house. Pickle looked up from his book. Where are you going? I have to do something, Reed repeated. What? Pickle asked. What could Reed say? He couldn't say. He couldn't say I had to go to the school and free Julius, even though that was exactly what he had to do. He had to run the 3 blocks to his house, get to his bike, and pedal back to the school. Then he had to get in the school without setting off an alarm. Thankfully, he'd overheard a senior talking about a basement door that wasn't wired into the school security system, and the key ring the janitor kept in a fake rock. Then he had to go through the darkened school without wetting his pants like a scared little kid, and then he had to unlock Julius and run for his life. No, wait. Should he check on Julius before running? What if his worst fears were true? If Julius was badly injured, wouldn't Reed have to call an ambulance? He almost groaned out loud, but he stopped himself. What if Julius was dead? Reed? Reed blinked when he realized Pickle had said his name. What? He said. You said you had to do something. Pickle reminded him. I asked what you had to do. Then your brain took a vacation and you turned into a weird statue. Statue? Reed was stalling. He tried to think of a reasonable story. What would he have to do right now? Other than go save Julius from a modern-day version of the wheel. Shelley? Pickle said. I think something's wrong with Reed. Shelley looked up from her book. Of course something's wrong with Reed, she said. He doesn't engage in enough intellection, and he lacks the appropriate niceness when it comes to schoolwork. Oh, snap, Reed thought. Even in his agitated state, he recognized that Shelley had just used 2 words of the day. However, he was far too distracted to care about what they meant. I'm not talking about Reed's commonplace imperfections, Pickle said. I'm referring to the fact that he's currently making no sense and his body keeps forgetting how to remain animated. Well, see, that's what I like about Reed, Shelley said. Reed perked up, momentarily forgetting everything about finding out what Shelley liked about him. Thank you for the nut. What's that? Pickle asked. Reed was relieved he didn't have to be the one who asked. He rarely makes sense. I like that. It gives me a challenge and keeps me interested. Reed couldn't stop himself. He grinned like a maniac. Thankfully, no one was looking at him. Pickle and Shelley were looking at each other. Reed's gaze was on the little robot, whose metal limbs were now so distorted they looked elastic. I can see your point, Pickle said to Shelley. But my original question remains. Pickle returned his attention to Reed. What do you have to do? Before Reed could come up with something lame, the little robot hit the side of the miniature house again. And when it did, something large hit the outside of the Gerard's house. Shelley looked at the French doors, then put her attention back on her book. Wind must have come up. We probably lost another branch off the big fir tree, Pickle said. Reed looked at the window. In the short time since Gerard had left, night had slipped in around the house. Now blackness clung to the windows like a fungus. Reed couldn't see anything in the framed glass of the French doors except the reflection of the room he was in. In that reflection, he watched Ori aim the robot at the house again. He watched it hit the miniature house. In the same instant, something hit the side of the house again with a reverberating thump. Reed tensed. He looked at his friends. Neither Pickle nor Shelley reacted to the latest sound. They were apparently satisfied with the wind and fallen branch explanation for the second thump. Or, since they were reading again, they may not have even heard it. Well, Reed heard it, and the wind explanation didn't cut it. He was listening intently now, and even though he'd heard those impacts against the house, what he didn't hear was wind starting to blow a branch at the house that could make noise. He should have been hearing a whistle whooshing sound if the wind was blowing that hard. And except for the continued crackle in the fireplace and the sound of the robot hitting Shelley's little house, the only other things Reed could hear were the impacts on the side of the house. Every time the robotic skeleton hit the model house. What if it was Julius out there? What if he truly had been manipulated by Pickle's remote all this time? By now, what condition would Julius be in? What Reed lacked in intellection, he made up for it in imagination. He couldn't easily envision a body covered in swelling, blackened contusions. He could see limbs as limp as rubber with bone fragments poking through the skin. He could see a battered face, a bleeding skull, and a spine warped into something sickeningly abnormal. If, in his exoskeleton, Julius had been spun, then bashed into things over and over, and if he'd been twisted and contorted the way Pickles' robot had been, would Julius even be human anymore? He'd be a mutilated mass of broken bones, and torn flesh. What was it Shelley's history book had said about the victims of the wheel? A victim of the wheel ended up looking like a moaning monster with bloody tentacles. Yep, that's what Julius would have become if everything Ori had done to Pickles' robot has also been done to Julius's exoskeleton. Ori rammed the churning robot into the miniature house again, and again, outside, something hit the real house with a similar force. Reed couldn't believe Shelley and her brothers were ignoring the sounds. How could they not hear them? You never said where you were going, Pickles said. Another robot impacted the metal house. Another whoomp outside. Pickle didn't mention the mimicking sounds. Reed's legs gave out and he dropped to the ground. He wasn't so eager to go outside anymore. No, he now wanted more than anything to stay inside. Maybe forever. He looked around. Were all the windows and doors locked? What if they weren't? No, of course they were. Miss Gerard wouldn't forget to lock up. She was a fanatical about safety as she was about keeping her children well fed. Reed? Reed looked at Pickle. Oh, I forgot what I was thinking of. You forgot you wanted to leave a few seconds ago? Pickle asked. Reed nodded. I think I ate too much. My brain is drowning in buffalo sauce. Pickle came up with this partial smile. Mom does make great chicken wings. He leaned forward. Hey, I wonder if there are any more. Or are more of those popper things. He looked at his sister. Hey, Shell, do you know if Mom put away any extra chicken wings or those popper things? Shelley looked up from her book. Huh? Chicken wings? Poppers? Oh, no, they're all gone, Shelley said. And you can't be hungry already. How is it fair you get to eat so much and stay so skinny? My life would be paradisical if I could eat like you with no consequences. Like paradise, Reed thought, in spite of himself. Ori had stopped plowing the robot into the miniature house. Now he was circling the robot around the house at a dizzying speed. I can't help it if I'm hungry, Pickle told his sister. Well, you can't be hungry. Maybe you're just thirsty. I want a soda, Ori called out. It was the first thing he said since he returned to playing with Pickle's robot. Hey, that sounds good, Pickle said. We don't have any, Shelley said. Why? Pickle asked. Remember, Mom read some article about the combination of carbonation and sugar. She discovered that our bodies process the mixture as a poison in the system. Right, I do remember that, Pickle sighed. We shouldn't let her read. All she seems to read are things that make our life suck. Reed, who by now had wound himself tighter than Pickle's grasp of basic math, blurted, Your lives don't suck! Pickle, with an open mouth, turned to look at Reed. Sorry, Reed said. Sorry. Pickle said nothing, but Shelley put down her book and looked at Reed with one eyebrow raised. Reed shrugged. It's just that you're so lucky to live in a nice house and have a mother who always makes good food for you and loves you, and... He stopped because he felt like he was going to cry, and he did not want to do that. It was the stress. He was making himself crazy with his panic. The little robot started climbing up the side of the Shelley's miniature house. It looked like it had somehow grown suction cups on its legs. It scaled the side of the toy house if it was a spider. For a moment, Reed was memorized by the robot's functionality, but then he realized he was hearing something outside the Gerard's house, something new, something majorly disturbing. Something was crawling up the outside wall of the family room. No, that couldn't be. Could it? Reed tried to block out the sound of the little robot's circle clicks and drone. He listened hard beyond that. Wasn't that distant shuffling sound something on the house? Yes, there! He could hear a sort of scrabbling, similar to what it sounded like when he once saw a raccoon climb up the side of his own house. Maybe it was a raccoon out there now. Maybe he was literally going insane and he was imagining all of this. Uh, yes, exactly, Lamox. Lives don't suck. I'm gonna go and say that to you. You know what? That's fine. Go ahead. Be my guest. Maybe he was literally going insane, and he was imagining all of this. He had to be going insane. What he was hearing wasn't possible. But then, why would he suddenly be going loopy? Was it guilt? Was he such an unadulterated wuss that the second he did something a little gutsy, his brain lost its grip on reality? Was he going crazy just because he'd locked Julius into the exoskeleton? You're right. You're right, Pickle said. Reed almost jumped out of his skin. What? Pickle cocked his head at Reed's peculiar behavior. I said you're right. We are lucky. It was illogical of me to have allowed that to escape my awareness. Perhaps my blood sugar is low. If I had a soda... We don't have any, Shelley repeated. I want a soda, Ori said again. He must have not have wanted one badly because he was still playing with the robotic skeleton. He had gotten it to climb up to the second floor of the small house. Reed jumped up and headed toward the stairs. Where are you going? Pickles asked. Reed stopped. Good question. He didn't normally wander around the Gerard's house as if he lived there. He'd been upstairs, of course, to both of the twins' bedrooms, and even in Ori's bedroom. But he'd only been in their rooms when they were in their rooms. What reason did he have to go upstairs now? What reason, besides his uncontrollable need to know something was clutching onto the exterior walls of the house by the second-floor windows? Sorry, I just thought of a book I needed to borrow. I was going to go get it. I should have asked first. Pickle studied Reed for a few seconds, and then he shrugged. Sure, go ahead. You don't need to ask your family. This, for some reason, made Reed choke and cough, as if the words created an emotional hairball in his throat. But he knew it wasn't the words that were choking him. It was his guilt. No one in the Gerard family would have done what he did to Julius, even if Julius was still just locked in his metal skeleton in the robotics classroom. They sure wouldn't have let Julius get tortured, possibly to death, by Pickle's remote. The second they even had an inkling that it might be happening, they would have gone to check. What Reed lacked was initiative, motivation, impetus. Ha! Nisus, an effort to attain a goal. Reed shook his head. His brain was weird. Here he was in a total freak-out because he was pretty sure he tortured someone who was now climbing up the outside of the Gerard's house in a giant robotic exoskeleton, and his brain was defining words of the day. Maybe if Reed had more nisus this evening, he could have saved Julius before Julius started crawling up the side of the house. Stop it! Reed screamed in his head. Julius is not on the side of the house. Oh, how Reed hoped he was out of his mind. He had a very, very, very bad feeling, though that he was as sane as anyone. For some reason, he just became clairvoyant, or wasn't omniscient. Or maybe he was just observant and sensory aware, because he could still hear something that was definitely not tree limbs crawling against the house. Reed realized that Pickle had given him permission to go upstairs, and Reed was still standing there. What was wrong with him? He shook himself and strode to the stairs. Then he ran up the stairs two at a time. On the landing, Reed stopped and looked around. Now that he was here, what was he going to do? If he looked out a window and actually saw what he was afraid he'd see, what was he going to do about it? How could he get... Sorry, I lost my place. How could he get rid of Julius in his exosuit without his friends knowing? Heck, for that matter, how could he get rid of Julius, period? Reed looked up and down the hill in a complete indecision. What now? Shelley's tidy white and green room was to the right. Shelley loved white and green. The colors of purity and life, she once told Reed. Pickle's cluttered, black-walled room was to the left. Ori's race-car motive bedroom was across from Pickle's room. A small, pale yellow half-bath was straight ahead of Reed. Light suddenly shined through a window in the bathroom. From outside. Reed gulped. He remembered that the garage had motion sensor lights in the backyard. One of them had just come on. Reed stared at the window intently, but nothing else happened. Except for the light, he didn't see anything. Nothing appeared in the window. No shadows, no movement. He couldn't hear anything moving anymore, either. He's trying to listen. Nothing. Remembering he was supposed to be up here looking for a book, he figured he should head to Pickle's room and find something that he could come up with some plausible explanation for wanting. He ignored the prickly sensation on the back of his neck as he took a step in the dark hallway. Images of Julius's maimed body jumped into the forefront of Reed's mind, and he had to swallow down a scream. It's just my out-of-control imagination, he thought. Flipping a switch just inside the doorway of the Pickles' room, Reed gratefully left the dark hall and entered his friend's domain. Stuffed with books, CDs, and scientific equipment, Pickles' room more resembled a laboratory than a bedroom. Only the twin bed with its constellations bedspread suggests the room belonged to a boy just in his teens. The rest of the space screamed genius. Reed crossed to Pickle's wall-to-wall bookshelf. He went to the section where he knew Pickle kept fiction. Pickle read more nonfiction than fiction, but he did have a selection of sci-fi books he claimed were as educational as many of his science books. Reed plucked one of those books from the shelf without looking at it. After he had the book, he stepped over to the window and looked out past Pickle's glazed curtains. Unfortunately, the light in the room gave him a very little more than his own reflection. A view of little more than his own reflections. Hold on, give me one moment. Thank you for the hydrate. I don't know why, but I'm feeling nasally.
Oh, well?
Thank you for the oh whoa. Thank you also again for another hydrate. Oh well. Anyway. Where was I? Unfortunately, the light in the room gave him a view of little more than his own reflection. He hadn't thought that through, obviously. You don't try to see outside at night from a well-lit room. But even with the reflection of the room in the way, Reed could see enough to tell that nothing was outside the window. Clutching the book he'd taken from the shelf, he returned toward the door. He spotted bloody tissues on Pickle's nightstand. Pickles' nose. Reed was supposed to remind him to ice his nose. He'd do that when he went back downstairs. If he got to go back downstairs. What if Julius, in his probably ruined state, was lurking outside one of the windows up here, just waiting for Reed to appear so he could crash the glass and get revenge? Why was Reed even up here? He should have been hiding far away from where he thought Julius and his exoskeleton was. Who went toward danger instead of away from it? Someone who wasn't 100% sure the danger was real. Reed had to know whether his thoughts were right or crazy. He made himself return to the hallway so he could continue his search for whatever was or wasn't out there. It was still dark throughout the upstairs, and it was still silent. Reed crept across the hall into Ori's bedroom. At the threshold, he tripped over something and caught himself by the door jamb. His heart rate sped up. He'd heard a metallic clink when his foot made contact with whatever it was. What if it was an exoskeleton? He quickly turned on the light, almost afraid to see what it was on the floor. It was just a toy fire truck. Reed exhaled. He looked around Ori's chaotic mess. He couldn't remember seeing so many toy cars in one place. Not even at a toy store. Ori had one of those rugs with a racetrack on it. Toy cars were scattered all over the track, and beyond the racetrack rug onto the wall-to-wall carpet, too. Nothing unusual here. A bright red shade with a cartoon race car on it was pulled over Ori's single window. Reed couldn't bring himself to open that shade to look outside. As he flipped the light switch and stood once again in the hall, it occurred to Reed that turning on lights hadn't been that smart. Not only did the interior lights impair his night vision, but the lights telegraphed where he was. If something was outside, it could be hiding when he turned on the lights. Well, that was just dumb. Why would Julius be hiding? If it was Julius outside, if anything was outside, Reed wasn't sure at this point that either possibility would bring him relief. Either there was a broken and gory monster clinging onto the side of the house, or Reed was having a complete mental breakdown. Either way, he couldn't just stand here forever. Reed! Shelley called from the bottom of the stairs. Thank you for the ooh-woo. You. Reed froze as if he'd been caught reading her diary or something. Yeah? His voice broke. We're going down to the corner to get sodas. Do you want to come with us? No, that's okay. You go ahead. I'll stay here if that's all right with you. Sure. Don't go in Ori's room. You'll probably break a foot on one of his cars. I'm pretty sure he has some kind of vehicle assembly line in his room. Shelley snorted when Ori protested in the background. I do not. Wait, what's an assembly line? Reed smiled. For a second, he felt almost normal as he listened to Pickle, Shelley, and Ori head to the door. Oh, Reed? Pickle called. Reed went rigid again. He cleared his throat. What? Don't tell Mom where we went if she comes home early, Pickle yelled up the stairs. You're an idiot, Shelley told her brother. You think she doesn't know everything we do? She does? Ori asked in an odd tone. Everything? Everything, Shelley said empathically at the front door as the front door opened. Reed listened to the stomps and shuffles of friends leaving the house. The door slammed. He waited. He heard the lock slide into place, and he said a silent thank you for the way Shelley had adopted her mother's safety consciousness. At the same time, he became ultra aware that he was completely 100% alone in the Gerard's house. If what he thought was outside was indeed outside, this could be bad for him. Really bad. What if Julius had been waiting for an opportunity just like this? Well, why? Why would Julius wait if he was a lacerated monster? Wouldn't he just want to kill anything in sight? My sinuses. Every time I want to read something, my sinuses always get in the way. Sorry. Where were we? Wait. Now Reed's brain was really getting way out there. Just because Julius might have been mangled by the exoskeleton Reed had locked him into, and Ori had inadvertently made it do things that tortured Julius with mind-crumbling pain, didn't mean Julius had suddenly turned into a killer. He was still just a kid. Maybe a horrible kid, and maybe not even a badly injured kid, but just a kid. But was he just a kid? Not really. Julius was a really mean kid. Reed would never forget the day Julius first showed up in his school in 3rd grade. He wouldn't forget it because that's when his own torture started. Julius had been tormenting Reed for 6 years. Julius seemed to thrive on humiliating other kids, and he seemed to get downright euphoric when he hurt them. For all Reed knew, Julius was already a killer. At the very least, he'd probably been murdering and dissecting squirrels for years. So if Julius was now in unspeakable pain because of what Reed did, it made sense that he'd be even more homicidal now. Reed didn't know for sure, but he figured agony brought out the worst in a person. The house creaked, and Reed leaped out at this pointless thoughts and back into the dark hall. That sound was just the house creaking, wasn't it? He listened for several minutes. When he didn't hear anything else, he crept down the hall to Shelley's room. He knew he wouldn't step on anything in here. She was obsessed with order. Going slowly, he felt his way through her room until he reached her window, which he knew overlooked the front of the house. Standing back from the edge of the window, he lifted the edge of her heavy green curtains and peeked outside. Nothing was out there that shouldn't have been. Below the window, the porch roof stretched along the front of the house. By the street, the mailbox leaned a little to the left. Two large cedar trees stretched their branches towards Shelley's window. One of the branches brushed against the side of the house. Although, as Reed had thought, it wasn't windy, there was a slight breeze, and the branch moved against the siding. Was this the sound Reed had heard earlier? Had he gotten himself all worked up for nothing? He hoped so, but he didn't think he was worried about nothing. Scanning the night, he searched for any sign of movement. He saw none. Stepping away from the window, Reed picked his way out of Shelley's room. In the hallway, he hesitated. Should he go into Mr. and Mrs. Garrard's room? He looked around. As long as he didn't touch anything, why not? It wasn't like he was going to turn on the light and snoop around. He just wanted to look out their big window, which overlooked the backyard. Reed crossed the hall and stepped into the master bedroom. A nightlight near the master bath cast a dim glow throughout the room. It created creepy shadows, but at least it made maneuvering to the window easy. Alright, give me one moment. Let's see. I believe it's 2 minutes, isn't it? Oh, it's for 5 minutes. Alright, when his time is done, the first time I'll apply it again.
Not.
Knew it. Anyway. A nightlight near the master bath. It created creepy. All he had to do was swivel a rocking chair away from the window and nudge aside the curtain. Then he was able to see nothing unusual. Again, the yard looked the way it should. All was quiet. Enough of this! Reed dropped the curtain and strode from the room. He looked over the hall and ran down the steps and returned to the family room. The family room looked the way it had when he'd left it, minus the Garrard siblings. Apparently, Pickle had put a small log on the fire after Reed went upstairs. Because the fire was flaring up behind the metal screen that protected the room from stray sparks, Pickles' book was on the end table next to his dad's easy chair. Shelley's book was laying on the sofa.
Hey, listen!
Hey, listen! Reed sank to the cushy carpet. He looked around. Where was the little robot? He didn't see it. Did Ori take it with him? Reed spotted the remote on the floor next to the sofa, but the robot wasn't in sight. Maybe Ori got it stuck under a piece of furniture? Reed turned and looked at Shelley's miniature house. It really was an amazing thing. It seemed to be accurate in every little detail. All the furniture he could see on the front porch and inside the house through the open windows was exactly like the real furniture in the normal-sized house. What about the art and stuff? He wondered. What about the art and stuff? He wondered. He scooted over to examine the house more closely. As he figured she would have, Shelley had recreated all the art and knickknacks inside the house. Anything in this real house was in the toy house. She'd even put pencil marks with dates on the wall just inside the kitchen doorway. The marks and dates that chronicled the Garrard kids' growth over the years. And outside, one of the downspouts was bent just like the real one out front was. It Thank you for the applause. And outside, one of the downspouts was bent just like the real one out front was. It got bent when Reed and Pickle were trying to learn how to throw a football. One of their errant tosses, though forceful, went badly askew and left a permanent indentation in the middle. Reed shifted again so he could look at the miniature version of the room he sat in. Wow, he breathed. There was a super miniature house inside the miniature house. Talk about realism. It shouldn't have surprised him that Shelley was that thorough with her model house. Shelley never did anything halfway, and if she couldn't do it well, she stopped doing it. Reed remembered finger painting with Pickle and Shelley in kindergarten. The teacher had been wandering around telling everyone they were doing great, but when she got to Shelley, she didn't say anything. Aren't I doing great too? Shelley asked. Of course, kiddo, the teacher said. You're lying, Shelley accused. I can tell by your tone of voice. She stood up, put her hands on her hips, and careful to avoid getting paint on her red pants. Reed remembered watching the teacher think it over. She finally decided on truth. Well, you aren't really getting the point of finger painting. It's to be free with the color and have fun. You're trying too hard, making everything too perfect. Fine, Shelley said. She reached up, grabbed her paper, and marched over to put her finger painting in the trash. Reed grinned at the memory. Then he saw something silver and shiny glinting through the window at the back of the mini model house's family room. He leaned forward and canted his head so he could see behind the mini model house. Aha! That's where the little robot went. It was inside the miniature house, behind the miniature house. Reed started to reach into the miniature house to rescue the robot. Before he could get a hand in through the front door, though, the little robotic skeleton raised up off the floor of the house. Reed jumped, then started to shake his head at his edginess. And that's when Julius sprang up from behind the model house. Reed scrambled backwards, screaming. In his mind, he called what he was seeing Julius because his vivid imagination had prepared him to see the boy the way he looked now. But Julius didn't look like a thing like Julius. He was, in fact, exactly what Reed's mind had known Julius would be. Now, nothing more than a fleshy octopus-like mass of pulpy limbs attached to a metal frame. Julius could no longer be called a boy. He couldn't be called human. Reed wasn't even sure Julius was alive. Yes, Julius moved, but Reed didn't know if that was Julius initiating the movement, or if his corpse was just being controlled by the metal framework lashed onto Julius like a loathsome external parasite. Julius's face was slack, so there was no life there. It was slack because it looked like the bone structure of his forehead, cheeks, and jaw had been pulverized. His features were so distorted, he resembled some kind of crudely sewn cloth version of himself. No longer framed by wavy blonde hair, because that hair was now sticky and stringy with congealed blood. Julius's face was like a repulsive doll's face, a doll much worse than Alex's baby doll with the staring black eyes. Julius's eyes were 1,000 times more disconcerting than empty black ones. His eyes had rolled back on his head, so all that was showing was the whites. The murky, cloudy whites. Those ghostly whites made him look like a sightless zombie. But like a zombie, Julius, alive or not, was moving. He was moving determinedly towards Reed. Reed willed his legs to work, and he struggled to find his feet, looking wildly around the room. He tried to decide the best escape route. The windows? They had a complicated latching system. He wouldn't be able to get them open in time. The doors? Duh. Reed ran toward the French doors. He knew they had a special lock, the kind that required keys on the outside or the inside, but the key was kept near the door, wasn't it? He scanned the area near the door. No key. He realized he had no idea where the garage kept the key, and he had no time to look for it. Turning, Reed ran toward the entryway. The Julius thing scuttled out from behind the miniature house and tumbled across the floor after him. Reed tore through the archway, rounding the corner and heading to the front door. Before he could get there, though, Julius sprang to the ceiling and skittered past Reed to block his way to the front door. Reed didn't pause to consider his options. He just raced up the stairs. Glancing over his shoulder, Reed watched in horror as Julius and his metal frame flailed crushed limbs grotesquely to catapult from the entry ceiling to the stairway wall. The Julius thing scaled the stairway wall as Reed ran. Reed was barely able to stay ahead of his pursuer. Bye, lady! At the landing, Reed got a glimpse of Julius leaping to the ceiling again. Reed turned, aiming for Pickle's room. His plan, if he could call it that, was to use Pickle's scientific equipment as weapons to keep Julius at bay, while Reed escaped out of Pickle's front-facing window. Like Shelley's, it was over the front porch roof, so Reed wouldn't have to drop 2 stories to the ground. Although at this point, he'd have dropped multiple stories if it meant getting away from Julius, or what was left of him. Feeling something at the same time rubbery and sharp nick his shoulder as he tore into Pickle's room, Reed managed to get the light on as he entered. He grabbed the first piece of equipment he saw, a big and heavy microscope, almost too big and heavy for him to lift, but he managed. Once he had the microscope in his firm grip, Reed turned and swung blindly out in front of him. He was sure he'd connect with Julius because Julius was right on his heels. But Julius wasn't there. Reed looked around desperately. Where did Julius go? Reed looked up. The Julius abomination dropped off the ceiling and landed on Reed before Reed could swing the microscope again. The impact knocked the microscope from Reed's hand. It tumbled across the room as Reed screamed and tried to squirm out from under the horrendous combination of hard and sharp metal and squishy, clammy, destroyed body parts. At the same time, he tried to hold his breath because the Julius thing smelled dreadful. It smelled like blood, putrid flesh, and stale sweat. It was dripping on Reed, too. Julius's flesh is no longer stylish clothing, perforated by puncture wounds caused by jutting, cracked bones. Was smeared with dry blood, his body still seeped fresh blood, too. Galvanized by his revulsion, Reed stuck out at the metal flesh that attempted to engulf him. He fought with all the strength he had, and some he'd obviously gotten from someplace else. At first, Reed thought he was going to be able to get away. Julius's hands didn't work right, and they couldn't grip Reed firmly. Reed managed to slither out from under Julius, and he stood, trying to race around the bed to escape out the window. But what Julius lacked in coordination and grip, he made up for in speed. Reed made it halfway to the window, but then something caught his foot. No, not something. Julius, or his frame, or both. Reed looked back at the combination of metal and tissue that coiled around his ankle. "Let me go!" Reed yelled. Why did he waste his breath? Did he really think a shouted command would stop whatever Julius had become? It wouldn't have stopped him, human Julius. It sure wasn't going to stop this version of Julius. Reed kicked out, and his foot slipped away just a little, but then Julius clamped down harder. How? How was Julius able to grip anything without working bones? It didn't matter. Reed was just distracting himself with all these irrelevant thoughts. He was trying to put off the inevitable. Reed wasn't going to get away from Julius, not even if he made it to the window. Julius was now powered by a robotic framework a mere human couldn't defeat, especially if that mere human was Reed. Plus, Julius now seemed to be supercharged by the monstrosity that he'd become. And that monstrosity had been born of the kind of emotions that propelled humans past their usual limitations. Emotions like pain and fear. Emotions like rage. Julius's rage was more powerful than Reed's guilt. Reed didn't stand a chance. But still, he tried. Kicking his feet as if power swimming through the tide, Reed army crawled across the rug. He willed himself away what held on to him. He imagined himself going through Pickle's window and jumping to freedom. Reed let out a banshee-like cry and yanked his foot from Julius's grasp. He staggered to his feet and turned toward the window. Before Reed could take a step, though, Julius was on him again. This time, Julius fell fully onto Reed, and they both went down on Pickle's bed. Reed was pinned under Julius's hideous remains, and the metal frame strapped to them. Reed inhaled Julius's stench and gagged. Even as he gagged, he cried out, "Help!" Whose help was he calling for? No one else was in the house. Would the neighbors hear? Reed's face was just inches from Julius's lifeless eyes and sagging mouth. Gagging again and whimpering, Reed turned his face away from the horror above him. He shut his eyes so he could make the macabre attacker disappear by pretending he wasn't there. His heart pounding so loud he could hear little else. Reed bucked and lurched, trying to free himself from the thing, but he wasn't strong enough. Even though Julius didn't seem to be gripping Reed in any way, his weight alone, along with that of the metal framework, was enough to pin Reed in place. Reed was trapped. Practically hyperventilating in shock and fright, Reed forced himself to open his eyes and look at Julius. When he did, he was sorry. He immediately closed his eyes again. He couldn't stand looking at the milky white irisless eyes staring down at him. Or were they staring? Reed didn't even know if Julius was conscious. How could he be with his bones crushed to smithereens? It was more likely Julius was dead, and the movement of the thing he was trapped into was caused by some kind of short in the system. Maybe the interference of Pickle's remote had so badly fried the exoskeleton systems that it was widely functioning on its own now. Something dripped into Reed's face. He had to open his eyes. It was worse not knowing what was happening above him. Reed opened his eyes. Okay, maybe not knowing wasn't the worst. Blood was pooling in the spongy mass of what used to be Julius's face. It looked like a misshapen sponge that had been used to clean up a massacre, and now it was dripping its warm, wet contents under Reed's cheeks. The previously cream-colored scarf looped around Julius's neck was saturated too. It hung down toward Reed like a dead animal in a slaughterhouse. Mesmerized now by the whites of Julius's eye bulging out from between long blonde lashes, Reed couldn't turn away from the malformed thing above him. But he still struggled. Grunting, he shot upward with all his might. It did no good. It was like the weight of 100 cars pinned him down. "Please, please," Reed whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I didn't know this was going to happen to you. I just wanted you to be locked in overnight. I didn't want this to happen." He knew there was no use in begging, but he couldn't help himself. He opened his mouth to say something else, but that's when the question of whether Julius had consciousness was answered. Julius shifted downward to press his heavy, seeping mass against Reed's mouth. Reed could no longer speak. But he could hear. In the distance downstairs, the other kids were returning from their soda run. Reed could hear Pickle suggesting to Shelley that he could construct a better torture device than anything medieval people had come up with. "I'm not sure that would be an accomplishment, Pickle," Shelley said. Reed strained, grunting, desperate to get their attention. Trying to yell, Reed could only make unintelligible groans. Downstairs, Ori piped up, "Can I play with your remote again, Pickle?" Julius shifted, and Reed allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe he could get away. Pouring every bit of life force he had into his muscles, he surged upward. He hoped to erupt like a volcano, and get ejected away from Julius toward freedom. But he didn't erupt. Or rather, he did, but before he could get ejected away from Julius' cage that is imprisoned him, Julius' mashed hands somehow grabbed hold of Reed's outstretched hands. Julius's formless legs somehow managed to wrap tightly around Reed's ankles. Reed was now as linked to Julius as Julius was to his exoskeleton, and Reed knew what was going to happen next. With the pressure of Julius's face wedged against Reed's throat, Reed couldn't make a sound that could be heard downstairs. He was facing his worst nightmare, and he couldn't scream. Downstairs, Pickle responded to his brother's question. "Sure, Ori, go nuts. We have all night." Ori grinned and knelt on the floor next to the miniature house. Usually interested only in cars and racing, Ori was surprised by how much fun this robot was. Maybe he could get his brothers to build him other things. He'd never been able to get a robot to move this way before. It was super cool. Pressing a button, Ori got the little robot to crawl out from behind the miniature house. He carefully maneuvered the robot out of the miniature house, not wanting to get on his sister's bad side. One time, he ran the little skeleton into a wall. When he did, he heard something bump on the floor above his head. He looked up, but he didn't hear anything else, so he continued carefully guiding the robot out of the house and onto the miniature porch. When he got it out, he did a little fist pump. Oh, happy with himself, Ori grinned wider and decided to see if he could get the robot to do even weirder things. Hello, Polar Bear. Unfortunately, I can't speak, what is that, Chinese? Hold on. Whoop whoop, someone is far away. Juke. So it's Korean. Alright, cool. Whoops, isn't there such a thing as a wish that it's easy to eat? Choke chuck.
죄송합니다. 저는 한국어를 못하지만 여기서 즐거운 시간을 보내시기 바랍니다.
Let me pause that for a moment. Ooh. I don't know if you heard that, Polar Bear. Let me play it again.
죄송합니다. 저는 한국어를 못하지만 여기서 즐거운 시간을 보내시기 바랍니다.
Let me read your comment. Whoops, I'm attracted to aggro Chuck. Shall we measure the cost effectiveness? Not really entirely sure what that means.
죄송합니다. 무슨 말씀을 하시는지 잘 모르겠습니다. 당신이 여기 있어 기쁩니다. 하지만 당신이 내 영어를 이해할 수 있을지 확신이 서지 않습니다.
I don't know how accurate this is. Sorry, I'm not really sure what you're talking about. Glad to have you here, but I'm unsure if you can understand my English. That's what I said. Oh, I love talking to people I don't know the language of. It lets me use Google Translate a bit. Xbox, don't. Don't what? It's terrible. What's terrible? Where is the fur? Google Translate. My character doesn't necessarily have fur. It's got fuzzy ears, though. Oh, also, roll Dutch Ruden. There you go, Janlin.
Janland sieht gerne zu, wie sich viele Mädchen ausziehen.
Yeah, it's all under the scarf. Not have fur. Not necessarily. Sorry. My autocorrect is bothering me. Did you not understand what I wrote, Janlin? My parents are in my room. I'm sorry. That was hilarious. Anyway, gotta finish. Oh, I do have a tail. Where was I? Oh yeah, I was on the last page before I got interrupted. He knew. Oh wait. Oh, hold on. Happy with himself, Ori grinned wider and decided to see if he could get the robot to do even weirder things than it was doing before he got his soda. He began manipulating the robot so fast his fingers were just a big blur. In response, the robot shut off the toy's house porch and began spinning and thrashing. While Ori shouted in triumph, the robotic skeleton began popping and snapping its metal limbs in all kinds of unnaturally delightful ways. Anyway, that is the end. That is the end of the breaking wheel in Fazbear Frights number 7. Thank you for joining me. Let's see. I don't know how well this will read, so.
귀와 꼬리에 털이 있습니다. 그러나 그렇지 않으면
Rar.
내 캐릭터는 털이 많지 않습니다. 다른 캐릭터가 있기 때문에 나중에 확인할 수 있습니다.
Anyway, this has been reading story time. What did I name this? Reading stories with Lamox Fox. I appreciate you all being here. This is fun, but I must go, for I have work tonight. I must go take a shower and enjoy the rest of my evening before I run off to work. Thank you once again, and have a pleasant evening, everyone.